Can we have a roll call, please?
Dana? You have to say where you are, get unmute, and then say where you are physically, just for the record. You're muted. There we go.
Present in Kalamazoo.
Okay, Dan,
I am here in Kalamazoo.
Jeremy,
Present Kalamazoo.
Andrew,
Present Kalamazoo.
Carla? It doesn't show that you're muted, Carla, but I didn't hear you. And Stuckey.
Kalamazoo and present.
Okay.
Great. Approval of absences?
I did not hear from John, but he habitually has a really hard time figuring out the 21st century. So I have a feeling he just may not be joining us tonight.
Okay,
I did not hear from him though.
thank you. Approval of the agenda. Any additions?
No,
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Dana.
Sec-
Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you,
Andrew
Andrew.
seconds.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, hearing none, the agenda is approved. Introduction of guests. I don't believe we have any guests other than us commissioners. Is there any public comment on non-agenda items?
No public comments at this time.
Thank you, sir. Sharon, will you read the disclaimer, please?
sure. Chapter 16, Section 22 of the City of Kalamazoo Code of Ordinance states, historical preservation is a public purpose. To serve that purpose, the Historic District Commission is hereby charged with the following responsibilities. The Kalamazoo Historic District Commission is empowered to regulate work on the exterior of historic resources and non-historic resources in historic districts in the City of Kalamazoo, and shall otherwise have all powers invested in historic district commissions pursuant to the Local Historic Districts Act, MCLA 399.201, 1970, PA 169 as amended 1992. B, to regulate work on resources which by city ordinance are historic or non-historic resources located within local historic districts, including but not limited to the moving of any structure into or out of, or the building of any structure in an historic district. The following documents are available in the Community Planning and Economic Development Department located at 245 North Rose Street. These documents will help assist property owners in understanding the responsibilities of owning property in a local historic district. MCLA 399.201, 1970, PA 169 as amended 1992, Michigan Local Historic District Act, the Code of Ordinances of the City of Kalamazoo, Michigan, Chapter 16, Historic District, the Secretary of the Interior Standards for Rehabilitation and Guidelines for Rehabilitating Historic Districts, 1990, and Standards and Guidelines for Kalamazoo Historic Districts, and maps of Kalamazoo districts. These documents and maps are also available on the City of Kalamazoo website at kalamazooCity.org/historic preservation.
Thank you, Sharon. There is no old business, correct?
Correct?
And we have no new business.
Correct?
So moving on, do we approval of minutes? Any comments on the minutes from our last meeting, which I believe was December? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I motion to
So
approve.
moved.
Okay.
I think Dan beat you, Andrew, so thank you.
Go for it, Dan.
Do we have support or a second?
Andrew Grayson, second.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. Administrative approvals, anything that you wish to discuss, Sharon?
Nope, not really. Pretty, kind of a slow start, but that's not surprising for this time of year and the last year that we've had, so.
Okay. All right, other business, review the draft annual report from the Historic District Commission to the City Commission.
Yeah, this is something that we need to submit usually before the beginning of March, and then it's just presented to the city commission. Just it's informational. This is what we've done over the last year and that kind of thing. So
And is that just the chart or is there,
no, there should
report.
be a come on. That's the meeting minutes and
oh, yeah,
there's a report. It's like 3 pages, 2 pages. Not a lot. 2 pages. So, yeah.
so does anyone have any comments on the report? So do you need a motion to approve the draft, Sharon,
Yep.
or?
Just like we do minutes, just motion to approve in second and then just a voice vote.
Okay. Do we
I
have a
move
motion
to
to approve
approve
the draft report? Go ahead, Stuckey, sorry.
That's fine. I said I would move to approve your, I don't know what you want to call it, previous statement or
Report.
Our Historic
Report.
District Commission annual
report would
report.
be, I guess, historical commission report.
Awesome.
Is that enough?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Dana. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, hearing none, the draft report is approved. And I think that brings us to our training, which do we remain in session or do we adjourn for training?
We just remain in session because
Okay.
because it's still public as far as we're concerned. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Now, when this happens, I don't see all of you guys anymore, but I can see the screen, so I can talk about that. It's really important that we have this training, especially because we know we're going to have some fairly big issues coming up over the next probably 6 months. We're going to have infill where those buildings came down during the fires in July. And we will possibly have a case of demolition by neglect coming up. And I don't think there's anybody currently on the commission that was with us the last time we had a demolition by neglect case. So I definitely want to go over those things. So I'm just going to go through this. It's a PowerPoint presentation. If you have a question as we're going, just, wave at me. I can see everybody. So you can wave at me and I can see you, or you can just hold off to the end and, ask then. But if you have a question and we're partway through and it's going to be answered before the end, then I'll just tell you that. But if it's not going to be answered, then we'll take just a moment and review it right away, answer the question right away. So here we go. Which one's going to work? There we go. Now, there we go. Needed to have the cursor on the right screen. So these are the topics we're going to be going through. We're going to be going through the standards, the Secretary of the Interior standards, which are the basis that we wrote our Kalamazoo standards and guidelines on. So if you remember these 10 commandments, you're going to be pretty good in terms of keeping good decision-making going on in Kalamazoo. We're also going to do a short review of infill and demolition by neglect, how that works, how the process works, and how I'm not going to go over the case that we might get, but I'm going to go over the idea of demolition by neglect and what that means. So the mission of any historic district is not necessarily to preserve the historic district like it was, a museum specimen. It needs to be a living neighborhood. Williamsburg, for example, it's a wonderful, wonderful tourist trap, but also it wouldn't survive if it wasn't a place where people lived and thrived and had places that they enjoyed being all the time. So a dynamic historic district seeks to keep the historic properties as part of the decision-making process for rooted growth throughout the city, so that we keep the past while enjoying and moving towards the future together. So that's, that's kind of rooted growth is something new that I heard about 2 years ago. And I really, really like it. The fact that the history is what keeps us rooted and grounded, but then change happens. Things happen to change in the downtown and everywhere else. And this is important. The historic district is very important because, and the decisions that are made by the commission are preserving our past, but even the little, what seems like very small changes make a big difference in the overall, in the long run, because they accumulate. We could be nickeled and dimed to death and lose a historic property, not thinking about the fact that, well, yeah, this replacement material almost looks like the original material. So it's okay. But if that happens enough, you start losing the authenticity. So what we choose to repair, replace, or demolish determines how the property is understood by today's and tomorrow's viewers. The property, the buildings are the mute witness to our history in Kalamazoo and everywhere else where they have a historic district. They witness the past for us just by existing. One of the mottos that the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions use is do not let bad things happen. And by bad, they mean irreversible. So you want to be really careful about the decisions that anything can be reversible with enough money, but if the money and the someone to champion the project is not there, it may not be reversible. So we need to consider irreversible decisions exceptionally carefully. So what you consider in making the decisions is the Secretary of the Interior standards. That's mandated under Public Act 169, that be the basis of the Historic District Commission decisions everywhere in the state of Michigan, if they're established under PA 169. We also take into account our Historic District Commission standards and guidelines for more detail. The significance of the resource itself and how it relates to the surrounding area, which is context. Then and also how the details relate to the building itself. So it's how does this building relate to the area? And then how does this change relate to the building itself? And is the design compatible, the arrangement, the texture, the materials, and the spatial relationships? And then this really fuzzy one, other factors such as aesthetic value that commission finds relevant. So the Public Act 169 in our city ordinance gives us a lot of wiggle room with having that sort of a line in there, the aesthetic value and what the commission finds relevant. The objective should be that we make a decision that if we handed over the materials from our decision-making to Historic District Commission in Charlevoix or Alpena or Calumet, that they would make the same decision based on what we're doing, because it's objective decisions that are being made. You can say I don't like it, although I don't especially approve of that. But if you do say you don't like it, you have to say why, and it has to be supported by an objective reason and a standard, not just your personal taste. I don't happen to like, stockade style privacy fences, but that doesn't mean that that's a good enough reason not to approve them when they are appropriate. So when you are making the decisions, we want defensible decisions. We want decisions that someone can understand objectively when they look at it from the outside, that we are making good decisions and we do not have to have appeals. We haven't had an appeal in Kalamazoo in about 5 years now, which is a good thing. It means we're making good, solid, defensible decisions. Part of it is the preparation, getting the packets together in a way that it makes sense to the commission. Site visits, either for the commissioners or for me. And then we have a well-defined process that we use consistently. We use our own guidelines as well as the Secretary of the Interior standards. And each meeting may be an opportunity to educate people and educate the property owners, because without their support and without educating them as opposed to lecturing them, we don't have anybody who's willing. We need the people that are willing to work with us to take care of these buildings. So it may mean occasionally that we don't get a perfect solution, but we need to try to enlist the assistance of all the property owners that we can. So you need to understand the historic property, and each building is considered for itself and also in its relationship to the things that are around it, whether it's the setback, whether it's the other homes or commercial buildings that are there, how far is it from the street? All those things are part of it. So there's the history is important, the architecture is important, and is the building contributing? Contributing and non-contributing, I think you guys are all pretty clear on. Contributing buildings are ones that are historic in nature, or that they have not been so altered that they still have some appearance and speak to their own history. Non-contributing buildings are more modern buildings, which would not include this Yamasaki from Bloomfield Hills. But they can be a modern building, that like the credit union down on the corner of Cedar and Westnedge, that's stuck in the middle of the Vine neighborhood, is the Vine Historic District, and it's not historic, but they still have to undergo the same review. That's a non-contributing building. So we're looking for character defining features, and then we're also looking for at both condition and integrity. Integrity is more important than condition. So history and architecture, the history of a building, where does it sit? How does it relate to things? This is one of the very early traders built houses from Mackinac Island, set on the green below the fort. So its place, its physical location on the land and the landscape is part of its importance. And it has quite a rich history. And then you get a building like this little modern one in Holland that's currently a shop. And it's a very modern building. And how does that fit into the historic district? No, that's wrong. That's Saugatuck. Anyway, how does this building fit into the context around it as a historic resource? So we're looking at both the architecture, not just the architecture, but what is the story behind the building as well. So they're character defining features, and they can be on a single building, like the round barn here. So obviously there are character defining features on the barn, the shape, the planes of the roof lines, the ventilation places, the pattern of the windows. Those are all character defining features. Same thing for this little schoolhouse, the double doors. This is up near Dublin, Michigan. And the double doors are because they had a separate door for the boys and the girls at the schoolhouse, and the steeple is still there. The gingerbread is still there. All of those things are important character defining features on this individual building. Also, it's a rural schoolhouse, and it's setting on a piece of land that is not developed around it, also as part of its character defining features. You can also have character defining features that are in a collection of buildings, whether it's a local historic district like ours that are contiguous, multi-resource, lots and lots of houses, historic districts, or a downtown commercial district like this one in Three Rivers, or this bungalow court in Lima, Ohio, which is really kind of cool. It's almost an exact twin of one out in Pasadena. So the story, the context is important. The character defining features of the bungalow court and how the houses relate to each other, how they're set on the circle driveway, how the driveway to actually park your cars most of the time and the garages are behind the houses. So that's all a character defining feature of this district, as the Three Rivers, the parapet and the tops of the buildings, the cornice lines are very important character defining features here. The pattern of the windows, the pattern of the display windows and the awnings, all part of the character defining features of this downtown historic district. Now, this is the difference between condition and integrity. You can have a house that is in absolutely wonderful condition, flawless condition. Everything is fixed. Everything looks beautiful, but it's because it's got vinyl siding and replacement windows, and the front steps are precast concrete. And so its condition is really good, but its integrity is missing. Of these two buildings, the building on the left has really good integrity. It's a little battered. It's in Benton Harbor. It's a little battered. It needs some work. It needs some love, but its integrity is good. The porch is there. The windows are there. The overhang of the roof is there. It's all there. And then a few houses away is this house that is a much earlier house, also in Benton Harbor, but it has lost a lot of its integrity because the porch has been completely enclosed. An addition has gone on to the left there, and it's a lower integrity, and the siding that's gone on it as well. So its integrity is low, even though its condition is poor, but its integrity is also poor. So condition and integrity, that doesn't mean that when you're making a decision about a building that has been a little bit battered and a little neglected and maybe hasn't been treated well, that you can just write it off and say, oh, don't worry about it. It's already had so much happen that we can just go ahead and do whatever we want. because that's not the case. You're trying to keep the rhythm of the streetscape and the collection as well as the individual buildings. This is a quote I like from Boyd Maher at NAPC. He said about authenticity. Appearance notwithstanding, this historic district isn't special because it looks like it's made of historic stuff. It's special because it's actually made of historic stuff. Anybody can make a neighborhood out of hardy board houses, but only our forebears can provide us with an authentic historic neighborhood. Imitation can be better than nothing, but real is still the best. Going to the Italy Pavilion at Disney World is nice, but actually visiting Italy is exponentially better. When we allow for authentic details to be replaced, the district's character gets nickeled and dimed over time, and we slowly transform our real history into something less authentic and meaningful. On Mackinac Island, until about 4 or 5 years ago, when they finally established a larger local historic district, they were in danger of losing their National Historic Landmark status because they had pimped up so many buildings and made them look like they were historic, or they built infill buildings that looked historic, and they were literally being threatened with losing their National Historic Landmark status, and that's the highest status you can get in the National Listing Program. They have turned that around now, but they just like, well, but it looks just like an old building is not really that's not really the answer we're looking for. Now, the Secretary of the Interior standards were established originally to evaluate tax credit projects. So I'm not going to go into the difference between the 4 major standards because we're talking about the rehabilitation standards. And the idea with that is that there's a high premium on retaining all of the historic fabric through conservation, maintenance, and repair. But it also allows respectful changes and alterations over time as needed. And so that's what we're looking for, is rehabilitation. We're not doing a restoration back to the exact year the house was built. We're not doing reconstruction, which is a very rare project because you need proof of exactly what was there before you can reconstruct. And preservation is something that we also aim for. It's kind of a subset of rehabilitation, and that is just taking care of what's there rather than making many changes at all. So the commission in our decision should always be fair and informed. It should be an open public process, which is required by the Public Meetings Act. The process should be used consistently. The substance of the decision must be reasonable and it must be objective. If there is an appeal, it has to be one of the things it can be based on is that the applicant can claim that the commission made an arbitrary decision. So we want to use a consistent process that's reasonable. We want to stay inside the box. As a historic district commission, our mandate is the historic appearance of the exterior of the building. We are not zoning and planning, although we may require in some cases that zoning and planning weigh in before we weigh in. We are not building code. We are not creators or designers. We review the proposal as presented using objective criteria. We're design review, not project design. That doesn't mean we can't suggest a change, especially if an applicant is probably going to come back with a new plan, but it's not our job to redesign it for them. It's their property. It's their responsibility to take that on. So this is what the City of Kalamazoo Code of Ordinance says about how we make our decisions. You have to take into account our guidelines, the context of the resource within the district, the context of the resource to itself and to the district, compatibility, other factors. And then there's something that was stuck in there by an act in 1972 that said that it's not considered a complete application until the applicant and owner certify that there is a working fire alarm system in the building. So that's a complete application. And most of the time that's just a checkbox on the application for any of those who have done it. Each case that we look at is case by case. There may be similarities between cases. In fact, frequently there are similarities between cases. But tearing down a carriage barn at one address is not going to be the same as possibly tearing down a carriage barn at another address. They're individual building and resources, and they must be considered on their own merit. No case is precedent setting, because we allowed vinyl siding to go on a house in the 500 block of Wheaton on the south side does not mean that we can allow vinyl siding now to go on any house of a similar age. Each one has to be considered only on its own merits and how it fits, that house, that building fits into the historic district what it contributes to the district, and whether this is an appropriate change. We can look for solutions by looking at other cases from other commissions. When I'm talking to other commissions in other cities, I say, be sure you're looking at a city that's a similar size to your own for your samples. Do not go looking at New York City, where they're talking about the Empire State Building and you're talking about a 2-story commercial building downtown. Sometimes the principles are the same, sometimes they're not. Their decision, just because another city did it, does not mean that it means it's okay for us to do it. But we can look at how they made their decision and see if anything there works in the decision we're trying to make. I also use online forums a lot to get advice from the National Trust or the NAPC, because they are people in our same position, especially NAPC. A lot of the members are commissioners like you guys, or their staff like I am, and it's a really great place to go and ask a question and say, has anybody ever encountered blank, whatever it is, as a problem? Whether it's using a material, fixing a material. We had one round that went in recently that was how to remove paint from sandstone. And so sometimes it's technical stuff and technical help, and we get that. There's a lot of help out there if you know how to use it. So this is something else we can consider. But the really important thing to remember is that all of our decisions are case by case. No case is precedent setting for other cases. When the process is all done of the applicant coming to us and asking for a decision, we issue a certificate of appropriateness. So the only questions we have is that, does the proposed exterior work meet the standards? It should meet all of the standards for whatever the topic is. Like most rehab work should meet 1 through 6, and we're going to go through those and you'll see why. Anything new that's new addition, new construction should meet standards 9 and 10, because those deal with new construction and new standards. So they should meet those standards, and then if they do, then we need to cite which ones they meet. And when we deny, we need to cite which ones the standards do not fit. So these are the Secretary of the Interior standards. Property will be used as it was historically or given a new use that requires a minimal change. So this, for example, this is an example of a fire station in Washington, D.C., where the fire station was taken over by, and this happens a lot, an architect's office. And the only thing they needed to do was change out those doors so they had room for some desks and some furniture inside behind the lower part of the doors. So that's all they had to do to bring it into a new use that respected its historic character and spatial relationships. So you want to keep minimal changes to the historic resource as much as possible. You want to keep the original character defining features, materials, spaces, spatial relationships, all these things. This may seem like a really minor detail on this duplex house. You can see how the 2 porches don't match anymore. And the question is, which one was the original porch? Was it the smaller columns and the overhangs, or was it the larger square columns? That would be a question. And then these windows with the curved screens that go over them, so that the windows that pivot on the center point can actually be opened in the summer. That seems like it's kind of, not really all that pretty looking, but it's an important feature of this house. And that's one of those details that ideally should be retained. So you want to keep the original character in as many of the details as possible. And in Kalamazoo, we still review the whole house, not just the sides that are visible from the street. I think it's in Louisville, Kentucky, they only front and the 15 feet back from the front corners of the house. So there are many houses down there that are sided with vinyl siding starting 15 feet back from the corner. We review all 4 sides in Kalamazoo. You don't want to create a false sense of history. You can't add conjectural features. Like this style of house would not have had this type of fretwork on it. So it looks very pretty and it's very graceful and everything else, but it's not appropriate to this style of house. So you don't want to add conjectural features just because someone offers you a really, really cool Queen Anne rail. and you have a Craftsman house where the rail's in rough shape, that doesn't mean you put the Queen Anne rail on your Craftsman house. It has to be appropriate for the house. And if it's not, if you can't determine what was originally there and it's missing, we should always go for something neutral. Like we often use a simple square spindled rail. If we don't know what the original rail looked like, we will go for this kind of neutral square spindled rail that at the correct height is it's better than making up some conjectural feature. Now, by the way, you could use these cute little thingies if you found them at Lowe's and you wanted to paint them up. The only difference that I would do is that rather than mounting them directly to the frame of the house, I would put them on hooks and eyes so that they were just decoration and could be taken down like bunting, like red, white, and blue bunting for the 4th of July. So you could still have your pretty, but it would not be permanently changing the character of the house. Sometimes changes to a property have acquired historic significance in their own right over time. They may not be original to the building, but they have, they are now significant. So this little storefront down in Micanopy, Florida, it did not originally have that second floor porch on it that wrapped around. So to go back to a rehab that went back to the original appearance, that would come off. But this has been on there long enough now that it has acquired its own story, its own significance. So it should stay on. Now, sometimes that's one of the hardest decisions we have to make is whether or not, okay, the porch was put on, it's a beautiful porch, but it's really deteriorating now. The owner wants to take off the deteriorating porch and put the original porch back on. So it's a really big question that we have to face sometimes. And that's why the Historic District Commission is the one making the decisions. It's not, it's not a mandate from on high, but you make the decision that's best for the neighborhood, for the district, and for that individual property. But this is one of the things to be considered is the changes may have acquired their own story, their own significance over time. You want to keep original features, especially windows. These are important character defining features wherever you can. I mean, I think we can all see this wonderful library in Manistee, Michigan. You can envision the double hung windows that are missing, maybe with a grid pattern in the upper sash that have just been replaced with these blank brown windows. And it just makes a huge difference. I mean, really, I don't really mind so much that the main entrance is now off the parking lot at the back, but those windows being lost, that has made a huge visual difference on this building. Oh, by the way, Manistee has, if you ever go, they have like one of the coolest little local history museums I've ever seen. It's in a 1910, 1920 drugstore that was never cleaned out completely. So all of the racks and the displays and the double-decker racks that you had a little catwalk around the edge to get to the drawers that are set in the walls, all the way up to the 14-foot ceiling. It's a wonderful little place to visit. Okay, that's my little advertisement for Manistee. We went up there to go snowshoeing and there was no snow. So this is one of the most important Secretary of the Interior standard that we deal with, is that deteriorated features will be repaired rather than replaced. When they must be replaced, the materials should be matching and there should be evidence of what the missing features looked like in order to make your decision. And in that sense, you always want to aim away from being too fancy and towards being simple but appropriate if you don't know what was originally there. Now, in the cases of these windows, this set was replaced to match. So those are new windows. And then this set on this Lewis Supply Company was actually repaired. They took out the original windows, repaired them, and put them back in again. So ideally, we want to do that. If they do need to be replaced, they should be as close a match as possible to what was originally there. Sometimes it may not be possible for it to be an absolutely perfect match, but that should be the goal, as close as possible. These are the two standards that we don't get as often. I get them sometimes. You very rarely see them, but remember, these standards were established to review tax credit projects. And one of the things that often used to come up, not as often now on tax credit projects, is I just want to clean it. I want to make it look good. And so the standard they came up with was that you should always use the gentlest means possible, because if you sandblast the hard outer coating off of this historic brick, suddenly you're left with a sponge that will absorb moisture. And then if you're anywhere, well, actually anywhere in the US right now, you can spall that water that gets into the brick can spall and just can continue to deteriorate over and over and over again. So always use the gentlest means possible. Go ahead and leave the patina on. It needs to be careful. There's a not preservation brief, but technical brief that I really like, where they talk about cleaning a building in Buffalo, New York. And this is a technique, by the way, that it's also available as a rental system now. What they did was, rather than try to blast off all the dirt and the schmutz from being in Buffalo for all those years, is they just set up scaffolding around the building, and then they attached lawn sprinklers. And then every night after everybody had left downtown, because Buffalo hollowed out at night when people left the business area, they just would let the sprinklers run, just like it was raining on the side of the building every single night. And all that was washing off into the street and into the gutters was just the grime. So there was no chemicals, there was no nasty materials, and it didn't make the building perfectly clean, but it made it look substantially better. And this is now a system that is available for rent. I've seen it. It's just nice that they continue to use something that keeps a little bit of the patina but protects the building. So it's important. The techniques and materials are very important. We also want to protect underground resources. This is something we rarely come across, but we want to be sure that we're protecting underground resources. By law in Michigan and in most states, if an excavation uncovers human remains, everything must stop until the state police can investigate. Sometimes it's the state archaeologist that comes in to help investigate, which would have been the case here on Mackinac Island, because they tore down one of the last wood frame buildings on Main Street that had been a boarding house, and they knew it was on top of a Native American burying ground from the earliest times the island was settled. And so they did find human remains. So that's whenever they find human remains, and this is from in New York City, they wanted to build this skyscraper, and they started doing the excavation, and they came up with coffins and obviously human remains. And once they started the excavation, they realized what they had was the African burying ground. It's now a National Historic Landmark. They moved the footprint of the skyscraper so that the burying ground could continue to be excavated. It's an ongoing excavation in New York City. Absolutely fascinating what they've been finding. So it's, that you want to not disturb anything underground if you can avoid it. Sometimes a good mitigation when there's a suspicion that there may be something underground is to put a parking lot over it. Because as long as it doesn't need a drainage basin, it's preserving everything that's underground. Archaeology is one of the few skilled areas where in order to find out what you want to find out, you have to destroy the site. Anyway, the Secretary of the Interior Standards, this is number 9 and 10. These deal with additions and new construction. They should not alter historic materials other than minimally. The new should be clearly differentiated from the old, should be a compatible design, and it should be secondary to the original historic building. This is a house in Washington, D.C., not Georgetown. This is near the zoo. And this is the addition they put at the rear. They needed more space. And from the front, you see it, but it's not dominating. It's not the first thing you see when you look at the house. It's compatible, clearly differentiated, smaller. I think they did a really, really good job with this addition. And that's what we're always looking for in additions, is something that is secondary and does not change the view of the original historic resource. They should be, yeah. And here's some examples of maybe not quite so good. This Denver one is like, no, not good. That might keep your teenage son out of your hair, but I'm not sure it's a good addition. And this one is clearly differentiated. I'm not sure it's compatible. It's definitely secondary. That's a really good question, but that's the police department in Saginaw. So there's, you need to consider there's no one answer that will always work. That's why there's a commission appointed to make the decision, because it's not like building code where you have to have a certain size water service for a house of a certain size. It's a little less well-defined than that. And new additions and adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in a manner that, if removed in the future, the form and integrity of the historic property would, I call this reversibility. This is again a sample from Micanopy from about 2013 when I was down there. There's this really, really old house in Florida. It's very rare that these old log type houses have survived, but Micanopy is absolutely a tourist trap. And they wanted to expand what this had been a gift shop for probably almost a century, and they wanted to expand it. And so rather than change the historic building, they just built this roof over it that just kind of protects it, but it also allows them, you can just see in the picture here, to have a larger display area. The only thing they had to do was connect the old cabin by the back door into this new display area, and then they had a nice big shop. And if they wanted to get rid of it, that original building would still be there pretty much in one piece, relatively unaltered. It's not always possible to have quite such a simple solution, but it's something to consider. So reversibility is very important. Other additions, a barrier-free ramp is always considered to be an addition, almost always, because what few barrier-free ramps there were in the historic period tended to be on hospitals and tended to assume that there would be relatively strong people pushing gurneys and wheelchairs up ramps. And so they're very steep. So there are very few examples of historic barrier-free ramps that we can call on. So we wanted something that's secondary and is an addition. This is a little restaurant up in Flint that's very, very popular. It's the place that's kind of like, it's to Flint like White Castle is to a lot of other places. You know, the sort of place that your grandma and grandpa took you, or your mom and dad, and you remember it from when you were 6 years old, and, you know, and it's very, very popular. I found the food was okay, but it wasn't anything as emotionally charged for me as it was my friends that were Flint natives that took me there. So, and this is a pretty good addition. It's very simple. It increased the dining space substantially. It's clearly secondary. This is not in a historic district, by the way, but I think they did a really good job with it. These are additions. I just love these in Chicago, rooftop additions outside Wrigley Field. From the ground, if you're not seeing the people up there, you would just see the increase, you know, that little fence along the front, basically. But from the top, you can see that it's, you know, you can watch your Cubs play from the roof of a neighboring building. So rooftop additions are not something we get in Kalamazoo very often. I think we have only had one, and it wasn't in the historic district. It was just downtown design review area. So in a rooftop addition, what you're looking is for something that's set back a little bit. You can see there it is here, and then this is just a small addition that went on up here. Or this is set back. You can see it from far away, but from up close, you would not even realize that addition was on the top. It's clearly differentiated from the surrounding area and buildings. So now we're going to talk a little bit about new construction and infill. As we saw with Secretary Standards 9 and 10, you don't want to destroy historic materials, features, or spatial relationships. These samples are much more relevant to infill in a commercial downtown than they are to what we will probably be seeing on North Street, where we're going to be seeing new building on an empty block, essentially, just facing the street. But we're going to want to consider what's across the street, which is the Woodward Elementary School, which was built in 1904 to 1925. We're going to want to be taking into account the very old Greek Revival house on the opposite corner, and then the Queen Anne that's on the other corner. So it's going to need to be something not necessarily that reflects that style, but that fits in to the area. But differentiate the old from the new, and if it's removed in the future. I just think this is the new building in this one, and it's the drive-through for this bank. So I think that's a very interesting approach. It did the job. It put the pieces together. It kept the facades all at the same level. This one is slightly set back, but not much. And I think this is a brilliant solution. This is up in Grand Rapids, and this is the old building here, and this is the new building, and the connector is this glass dependency in between the two. New construction and infill. This is the new stuff here. This is the existing historic stuff. So they apparently decided they weren't going to put one of the teacup shaped bowls on top here to make sure that everybody knew it was in the 21st century. But it fits in fairly nicely. This is a nice job of making sure the streetscape is continuous, that you have the same patterns of door openings that you have here on the older buildings. You have a pattern of fenestration that's similar to, but not necessarily a copy of what's on the other. And this corner piece is a little bit more of an homage to the way we do that kind of a corner tower today in modern construction, but it's not overstated. So this is a pretty nice addition. This one I'm not as sure about. Their new construction infill. It maintains the streetscape and the street facade, and being built right up to the property line. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting idea. But the scale is good. The setback is the same. The orientation is the same. The front door still faces the same front. The window pattern doesn't match. That's materials and texture. There's not a lot of material overlap there, but the height is so similar. So it's an interesting idea. And I think that whether it would be considered appropriate by our commission would depend on what was across the street. This is the sort of addition that could have gone in where Sarkozy's burned down when, after it's not a historic district, but something like that could have gone in to bridge that gap and to fill in the space. So this is more what we're going to be talking about when we are thinking about the infill that's going to go on North Street. This is in Denver. This is a new apartment building that went in a neighborhood that's filled with these large brick, late 19th, early 20th century houses. One of these was Molly Brown's house. And so they want something that was compatible. So the setback is very similar to what's nearby. The height, while this is a 4-story building, it's only a little bit taller than this building, and it's pretty close to the same height as the next house over in terms of compatibility. So it's got that height thing going on. The primary entrance still faces the same street as this primary entrance does on the adjacent houses. So the key thing is going to be a sense of scale. On North Street, we're probably going to be looking at a setback that should be 5 feet to 0, because the zoning for that part of the city is what's called live workspace. And if it's going to be a commercial building, they want it to be set as close to the property line and the front setback line as they can get. So if this was infill of a home, like if this was and there were still houses on either side, we would want the new house to be set back a similar distance to what the adjacent houses are. For the commercial infill, we're going to be looking at to be differentiated from the housing around it. It's probably going to be set right at the lot line, right on the sidewalk. Okay, so before we go on, I want to know if anybody has any questions about infill.
I had one real quick question.
Yes, sure.
I feel like I had it in my head that many of these lots in Kalamazoo that were former houses, like in the Vine and the north side and stuff, are those buildable? Can you build houses back on those lots?
It depends entirely. Up until about 2 years ago, there would have been a larger number of unbuildable lots just because they were too small. But we have recently fiddled with the zoning in a way that I cannot recall exactly how, but it would make more of them possibly buildable. The problem is that quite often what you got was a full city lot in Vine, especially where the lot was subdivided in half and then one house burned down. And so you really only got half a lot according to what we would normally expect to be able to build on. So the answer is maybe. There are some that are definitely buildable lots, houses to fires. There's at least one right at the base of Austin Street. There's an empty lot. Okay, that is not a buildable lot. That's too small. And I'm not sure I'd want to build at the base of Austin Street anyway, seeing the way that guardrail is frequently shattered to pieces almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are buildable lots and they can be built. Now, if it's residential going on, they would want to be a similar setback to what was by it. But even that lot is small, but if you put a small enough house on it, it might be buildable.
Cool.
So Yeah, Eric,
This,
Stuckey.
this was a question I was holding, but it kind of fits in now. So you mentioned the Michigan National Bank on Cedar Street,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
Lake Michigan, or whatever it's called.
Michigan Credit Union, yeah.
Across the street from that, there's a house that had a fire. Now, doesn't that fall under our jurisdiction in terms of we should be reviewing a plan, and they've already started
No,
rebuilding the thing?
The historic district ends at Westnedge. It just includes the things on between on Cedar
I
Street.
see.
It
Okay,
only
so
includes
that's
what
Vine,
faces
but not
Westnedge.
historic Vine.
Correct. I
Mm.
wish we could. I'm just happy to see someone working on it, to be
Well, I
honest.
was glad to see that, but it went through my mind when you mentioned that. I'm like, hey, yeah, I wondered why we didn't see that.
No, that's because it's not in the
Okay.
district. Sadly, because I think it would have been a good fit, but it wasn't. So yeah. So any other questions on infill? What's going to happen is I'm trying to have the architects come to us to discuss what might go there and just kind of have an early consultation. So that we kind of have an idea, not necessarily that we're not going to give them any kind of a decision, but just a consultation on how much of the land's going to be covered. A lot of the issues we're working through in our department to make sure that there's that parking does not need to be up front, that we got access from the rear, that kind of thing. So I'm just I'm really hopeful about this. I'm very sad that we even have this opportunity to do this infill, but I think it'll be good for the neighborhood in the area to have something on that lot again, especially something
Karen?
that's not two empty houses. Yeah.
I am of the impression that they have talked to you already. Is that not true?
I have seen a little bit of stuff, and we tried to set up a meeting back in December, and I don't remember what happened, but we weren't able to do it. But I'm happy anytime, just,
Okay.
just because I wish we didn't. I mean, there's always the option, and I don't think we'll do this. And that is, since all the historic houses on that block are missing, to just take it out of the historic district. But I think that since that's a process that would probably take a year, I'm not sure it's worth the effort right now. So, yeah.
Sharon, I have a question.
Yes.
On that side of North Street, right?
Mhm.
There's more than just that block that's in the historic. Whoops, sorry.
Yep.
In the historic, are there 3 blocks?
There are, if you know where Allen Chapel AME is,
Right.
on the corner of Staples, the vacant lot on the opposite side of Staples is not in the historic district. Everything up to Holly Street is in the historic district on that side of the street. But once you cross Holly, it's not in the district again.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So we're missing that one cute little bungalow, sadly, but everything else is. So there's not much on that side of the street that's in the district. So, okay. And there's always, I just want to go into this too. The commission always has the right to issue a denial. And that can be because the work does not meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. And it does not meet the standards and expectations for what we call a notice to proceed. So it depends on what the applicant is asking for. By the way, this is just a filler. This was actually an approved project after a fire. So everything is back together. We can issue a denial. The applicant may be able to reapply at a later date, but it has to be a different application. It can't be, oh, well, there's some new commissioners now. I want to resubmit and see if they approve it this time. That's not the way it works. It needs to be a different application. There needs to be some substantial difference between the original application and the new application. If the applicant does not agree and they think that we have made, as a commission, have made an arbitrary decision, they have a right to appeal according to our ordinance in PA 169 to the State Historic Preservation Review Board. The way that works is they have to issue an appeal. I got to go back a couple there. Oh, there we go. There, sorry about that. They have to send a notice that they want to appeal the decision to the State Historic Preservation Office within 60 days after the decision was made. They have to state why. There's some rules that go with it. If there's a denial, they automatically get, with the denial letter, they get complete instructions on how to file an appeal if they want to. They don't have to have a lawyer. They can if they want. They don't have to have a lawyer. And then the actual hearing is in front of a hearing judge that also hears labor disputes and other things. And so there's an official hearing, much like a court case, but it's an appeal. So you can't introduce new information. It has to be based on, the appeal must be based on the information that the commission considered. And then the judge makes a decision, or actually what he makes is a recommendation for decision. He sends that to the review board, and the review board can either accept or not accept the judge's recommendation for decision. We have in Kalamazoo, we have lost 2 appeals since I've been working for the city. One was before I actually started working because nobody showed up at the hearing. And the other one was one where we could not convince the judge that windows could be repaired and that replacement windows would be substantially different. So it's pretty rare. Most of our appeals, we've actually come out on top. We had one that went all the way up there, and the judge said, okay, I'm going to prepare my proposal for decision, but since I've got time, I'm not going to submit it for at least another month. So see if you can work out a solution between the applicant and the Historic District Commission. And as it turned out, what they had done was they had put in a door and taken out a window so that they could have access to the basement to allow the tenants in a multi-unit building to turn off the power in their unit without, you needed to be able to do that. You needed to be able to do it without a key, or without a tool. So that meant the door had to be unlocked. And they, once we actually did a serious investigation, we find out that the landlord did not realize that they had already put cutoffs for each unit. Each unit was wired separately, and there was a cutoff in each apartment already. So they didn't even need to put the door in to allow access to the power panel in the basement. So, yeah. So anyway, so we have not lost many appeals. We've done pretty well with that, but we also haven't had many because we're really hard to make sure we're using a consistent policy. Now, a notice to proceed is what is issued when demolition is allowed, because it can never be approved as complying with the Secretary of the Interior standard to demolish a historic resource. So by its very nature, demolition is always a notice to proceed. Why can we do a notice to proceed? And we need to decide, depending on the damage to the building and what the issue is, whether is this a project is this a structure that's a hazard? Can it be saved? What does the owner want? Sometimes the owner says, I want the insurance company to pay up and help me fix the building. Sometimes that's what the owner wants. So we need to kind of determine that as well. Now this house, I don't know if you know this house, Dana, but this is the purple house at the end of Willard. Okay, this house is inhabited again. It's been rehabbed completely, sold, and there's a new family living in it. And the entire roof was burned off. There was nothing left of the roof. It's a lightning strike. So now I'm going to go into violations and demo by neglect. Okay, because demolition by neglect is a way that a property owner can allow or can get work, just defer work until the point where the building is not salvageable. And it's up to the commission and other city staff when possible, and maybe neighbors, to notice when that is happening and notify the commission, because the commission can make a determination of demolition by neglect and can order work done. This is in Public Act 169 and in our ordinance. So you have to determine the court. So you start with the definition of demolition by neglect is neglect in maintaining, repairing, or securing a resource that results in deterioration of an exterior feature of the resource or the loss of structural integrity of the resource. So that's the definition that's in Public Act 169 and in our ordinance. Now, how this actually plays out with the commission is, this is how it is in our in our ordinance, chapter 16, we have to start out by making a determination that the building is actually undergoing demolition by neglect. Is this just, it's more than peeling paint? It's more than just the fact that one of the porch columns is failing. It has to be more than that. So we start with a finding of demolition by neglect. The first thing is we invite them to a hearing. I put it here, here we go. You have to consider if the property's condition has been caused by demolition by neglect, or it can be an act of God, but it has to be something that was not the owner's fault or not the owner's responsibility. So a tree fell on a house, destroyed a porch, he just gave up and hasn't done anything with it. That is something that is that's an act of God. So that's a different situation. So we would first have, we would bring the property to the commission to consider whether this is demolition by neglect. Has there been any contact from the owner? Has there been any effort on their part to try to fix it up? Or is this just an ongoing problem? So this meeting, the first time the HDC sees a demolition by neglect case, the owner may or may not be present, because all that the first meeting does is decide whether this is a case of demolition by neglect and if it meets the definition.
Sharon,
Yes.
is this something forced upon the homeowners by the commission?
It can be, yes, it can be, but we have only used it. I'm trying to think.
Well, and why? I mean, I can't imagine a homeowner would come in, like you said, an act of God is one thing, right? Like it's
Right.
fire or something, but I can't imagine an owner would say, I want to tear it down because I've just let it go to.
Oh no,
Yeah.
they're landlords.
Well, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that came to mind to me was the 3 buildings that the funeral home owns over there
Yep.
on
Yep.
Dutton Street, right?
Yep. And they
And
let
he's
them
done
go.
nothing, he's done nothing. And, oh, well, these just need to be torn down.
Right. And that was exactly what they were doing. We did bring, that was a demolition by neglect case that we brought for those 3 houses. The finding was that there was demolition by neglect in 2 of the houses. The third one still barely met the requirements of the rental housing code, so was occupied. But what the funeral parlor had come to the commission and wanted to tear them down because because they wanted to build something new. And what they wanted to do was build a replica of their building out in one of the suburbs. And the commission said, no, come back to us with another design and we may approve it. And they never came back with another design. But in the meantime, these houses were deteriorating. And so we did go through the demolition by neglect process with them, determined that it was demolition by neglect, and then required the funeral home to come to the commission and make a proposal. And the proposal that they made was to put the houses on the market and see if they could find a buyer. And it took them a couple of years, but they did find a buyer, and now they're being rehabbed.
Good.
So we haven't used it a lot. We have used it a couple times to pressure an owner into making a needed repair before things got worse. Sometimes there's a garage at the Lay House, which is down on South Street, and it was the Lay family manufactured automobiles in Kalamazoo. So the fact that it was their garage that was deteriorating was really important, because that's why they were important, was for automobiles. And we used the demolition by neglect process to pressure them into actually making the roof repairs that needed to be made before things got much worse. So we've had a couple cases where we've gone all the way through, like the funeral home properties, 121, 120, 124, and 128 West Dutton, that we managed to get them into other hands with someone who is fixing them up. So anyway, the process goes is we have a meeting with or without the owner, usually without, to determine whether this is a case of demolition by neglect. Sometimes these are cases that are pointed out by our code enforcement inspectors, who enforce on things like, they enforce on things like rubbish, but they also enforce on building condition, whether it's safe or not, buildings that are boarded for a long time, that kind of thing. And they try to get the owners to work out a solution and fix up the building. In some cases, to demolish it outside the historic district. That's quite often a solution. But inside the historic district, we'd prefer that we not demolish them. So if the HDC finds that this is a case of demolition by neglect, then the owner is noticed to attend the next HDC meeting with a plan for a remedy. If there's no action on the owner, if they don't show at the meeting, then the commission can determine what needs to be done. And if we have the support of the Community Planning and Economic Development Department and the city attorney, and we can find funding to take care of it, then we can get a court order to allow the city to enter the property and make the repairs. The vast majority of cases, in fact, I can't think of any time where we put demolition by neglect, where we use that on an occupied building. So it's usually a matter of the times when we have used it. I mean, that garage, the lake garage, the house was occupied, but the garage was not. Nobody kept anything in it because it had this big hole in the roof. We've never used it on an occupied property. So usually it would be a case of going in and making whatever structural repairs are necessary to stabilize the building. The key thing there is who's going to pay for it. Because you're not just going to get someone out of the goodness of their hearts saying, oh yeah, I'll go in and do this work for you as a contractor, but I'll just wait to get paid until the owner can get back to me. And then the cost of the work can be added as a lien on the property so that when or if the owner goes to sell it or transfer it, that will have to be paid back. But you still have to have the cash in the flow to actually pay for it. So this is what demolition by neglect is. This house, by the way, is gone. This house is gone. This was on the corner of Cedar and Locust. That's gone, and that's where the new Habitat house is. This house is, we're working with the owners to get him to get restarted on the work that he says he's going to do. He moved down to Texas to take a job, and he's just not keeping up on what needs to be done up here. This one is gone. This was owned by the Catholic Church, St. Augustine's, and this is where the new playground is. This was Saginaw, so it's really pretty, and they are working on it. Okay, questions of any kind. Do you have any questions? And this is a real paint job in Cadillac, not enhanced.
Yeah, so I mean, just getting back to the demolition by neglect, I mean, is there a mechanism out there that's looking for these houses in this condition?
Yes, we have 3 people on our code enforcement staff. Their job is to monitor and check on properties. Mostly they are vacant. The vast majority are vacant. Vacant properties owned by a landlord, sometimes owned, it's a property owner. This is like grandma's house and everybody lives in Oklahoma now. Nobody lives here anymore, but no one can get their stuff together to go ahead and fix it up and do something with it. So it's a way that we can pressure people into sometimes selling the house. Sometimes we've had to go up against the county land bank a little bit to get them to, fix this now before it gets worse so that this will still be a viable home. But yeah.
Does it, that also applies to like commercial buildings too?
Yes, absolutely. Whenever they're in poor condition, and we don't cite them for just, oh, you've got a little peeling paint on the eaves. It's got to be something that is serious and problematic. And sometimes the only solution is demolition because it has gone on for so long or it's been a complex case. So, so yes. And it's mostly used, we use it mostly as a way to pressure the owner into taking an action that needs to be taken. And that might be selling it, that sometimes that's demolishing it. Sometimes it's applying for a program where there are funds to help get the repair made, even if they're, low income or they can't afford it. So, yeah. And
we only can apply this to buildings that are in historic districts, right?
Correct. Now, the city does have a homeowners repair program that if someone has been cited, and especially if it's an owner-occupied home for something that's deteriorating, then we will not only refer them to different agencies that can help them, but we also have a small fund where we can help them get the work done. Okay. So, it's really trying to keep a house from deteriorating so badly that it is no longer of any use. And so if you see a house that's like that, that's not a fire damaged house. if it's like that for very long, usually what we've got there is an owner that is very, very defiant and is just not willing to work with anybody, not willing to interact with anybody. This one was that sort of a case. She lived in this house for years on a land contract. The debate was between her and the land contract holder about whether she had paid it off or not. So she couldn't get insurance because she couldn't get ownership title for it. Because it just slowly deteriorated. She had buckets all over the house catching water from the dripping roof because she couldn't get the roof fixed, because she couldn't get the insurance and she couldn't show ownership. She qualified for 2 different programs financially, but she couldn't get the work done because she couldn't prove ownership.
So Sharon, what is the story with the Stewart house?
Oh.
I mean, my neighbors ask me all the time, why is that house not being addressed?
So for those of you who are not as familiar with it, the Stewart house is the big white Italianate with the state historical marker in the front yard, almost across from one end of the modern end of Woodward School. Big white cube with a cupola on top. Wonderful, wonderful building. That was owned by is owned still by Dick Spiegelmeyer, who was on the Historic District Commission probably on and off for 25 years. Dick is old now. He's in his 90s, I think. He owns that house. He also owns the Todd house, which is right at the end of Oak Street where it hits South Street. And the last amounts of money that he put into both houses was to rehab and to stabilize and save both carriage barns. So those are in great shape, but no one is living in the Stewart house. I think there may be a caretaker in there. Dana, is there?
There's nobody living in there.
Okay. For a while for a short time, there was a caretaker in there. And Dick is working with his nephew to work on the house. And this guy, I don't know. I don't think he doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it. And it's in that kind of limbo space where it needs to have something done to it. There's nothing that has pierced the envelope of the building, unlike the tree that fell several years ago that made a hole in the roof. That's been repaired.
Except that animals can get in.
Yes.
And young people get in there.
So it's not what we call closed to casual entry.
Yes.
Let me pass on that concern to the folks who monitor that, because I would hate to take that through a case of demolition by neglect. But if it forced the owner to go ahead and sell it to someone, because Dick was very picky, he didn't want to tell someone who didn't get historic houses, and I'm not sure how much he gets it anymore. He was and still is, considered to be one of the top window rehab experts east of the Mississippi in the United States, and has consulted with ICOMOS about international buildings and window rehab and repair. So, I mean, he really gets preservation, but I think he's just, he remembers so clearly when he restored it in the 70s that I don't think he quite realizes yet that it's 45 years later. Yep. So I will pass on that concern, Dana, and see if I can get something moving on that, because I wouldn't mind going up and seeing him too, and maybe I could talk him into selling it.
The couple next door, Shelley and Fred.
Yes.
Shelley has a wonderful sort of school mother's voice, and she's always using it with the young people in there,
Now, are they people that are going in that are not associated with the house, or are they?
She does not believe they are associated with the house. There's another group that's associated with the house that's doing like auto mechanic repairs or something, using the garage or the carriage house or something. No, these are, the word is getting around that, if you want to get out of the weather. I don't know now since it's so cold. And I know it's not heated, but in the fall, there was a big problem with random young people getting in the building.
So maybe I'll just go over and take a walk around and take some pictures and see if I can get them on it, because they'll be happy to do it. That's not an issue, but it's just a matter. And this is one of the ones we've been going back and forth. I've been working with Rachel and Marvila, who are our team that goes out in the field. a lot on these properties. So,
Hey, Sharon, if you needed backup on walking around or didn't feel comfortable running into someone there, like you can always message me and I would be happy to zip over.
Dan, we should set up a time to do that.
Yeah.
Because it's really a glorious house, and I have never been physically inside.
Sounds like
entire
you
time.
walk right in.
Well, I hope not. I hope that's not the case. In fact, I, as a city employee, couldn't do that, but you could. So, but I will take. Yeah, and if you guys spot any buildings that are in the historic districts that are like that, I mean, I'm pretty aware of most of them. But there's some that we just, a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of pressure can sometimes get the property owner to do something. And then sometimes it's really, really difficult and they just don't want to do anything. And there's no way we can make them, until we just go and make the repair ourselves.
So my interest lies in the Kalamazoo commercial buildings, like old ones.
Right.
And so many of them are just you can just see it. They're just at the tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wish there was some mechanism, you can tell they're architecturally significant and interesting. And they're just like, for example, there's one, you remember Juanita's Mexican restaurant on, I think it's Burdick.
Oh, well, there's that one double storefront down there, down by Juanita's, there's 2 or 3 on Burdick that I'm very concerned about.
Yeah, there's one the building, it looks like maybe it was an old apartment building. It's got like a flat porch with no rail and 2 doors and then big windows. And one of the windows is now broken from a chair that went through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just know, and it seems like it's a pretty intact sealed building other than that broken window, but I just know that's going to accelerate everything.
Yeah. I know where you mean. Down by, I want to say the Roosevelt School, but not down by the Salvation Army.
Yeah, basically.
Yep.
And I wish there was some, I don't know, emergency, and I don't even know, who, the owner must not be in town or must not notice or something.
Right. And that's quite the case. We're pretty assertive about going after owners and trying to get them to do stuff to, just to button it up if that's the least. And we do charge them every month. There's an vacant residential building or non-residential building. They have to pay a fee every single month for the monitoring that the city does.
So would that be seen or looked after by just the normal building department? Is that who would?
Our code enforcement team. Yep. That's all their job is. And then in the summer, we have someone that does weeds and growing things and trash. We have a part-time employee, not part-time, but someone who does it just over the part of the year that does that kind of thing. So, yeah. So, yeah, there's a lot of buildings that I would like. I mean, there's that one, it's a double storefront. The glass storefronts could still be there. They're boarded now. 2 steps. It's just wonderful, wonderful little building. But
it is.
And it was owned by Benno's Woodworking for quite a while. He may still own it.
The one across the street, kind of, that looks like sort of like an Italian influenced or maybe even Spanish. That looks like the foundation is sunk on one side of it and it's kind of cracking. That's another one that, if it was renovated, it would definitely be, it would definitely add to the neighborhood, rather than like a new something.
And with the zoning changes that are coming up, where we're going to have many more classifications of areas as live workspace, because some of those old commercial buildings are trapped inside a residential area, like that little storefront down at the end of Rose Street near you. I mean, that's all zoned residential, but that's obviously a commercial building and was built to be a commercial building. So the new zoning will help that a lot because that'll allow more flexible use of the buildings. So any other questions that anybody has about anything that we've covered here? I'm going to get out of the share screen there. So any other questions you've got that I can answer? Maybe the tax credit is on its way back. Yay. But we are hearing that it probably will be summer, at least, maybe even late summer, before the forms and applications and rulemaking is done so they can start accepting applications. but work that began after January 1st this year will be eligible. So, and that's residential and commercial, inside and outside. So that does include HVAC, electrical, all that kind of good stuff.
I have a question for you, Sharon, concerning
Sure.
my home.
Yeah, you're outside the district.
I know I'm outside, but let's say I was in, and you're talking about that it must be a distinction. I had the mud room on the back of my house that has a dirt floor and no foundation. Sometime I'm getting much closer now that I'm ready to take that down, but then to redo a proper addition with a basement on it. Now, you were talking about it must be distinction. I was planning on putting cedar siding and make it look as close to the original as possible.
Yeah, and in that case you could, because you would, as long as your footprint wasn't going to be any bigger, you would just be essentially, that's kind of like an extensive repair, really.
Assuming I was historic.
Right, but if you wanted to make it bigger, then we would just have to. Yeah, we just would want to work on the design a little bit.
Yeah, I would like to push one side about 4 feet. That'll give me room for this proper stairway that I need to get into the basement.
Sure.
But
yeah,
and I know I can do that, but if I'm saying if I was historic,
yes, you
how
could.
hard would that change then be? Because I've expanded the footprint.
No,
and I'm not within my my lot's big, right? So I'm not over exceeding my I don't know, think of the term for it, but
yeah, you're covering the lot too much. Yeah, I know what you mean. You're zoning. No, that wouldn't. I mean, it's additions and new construction are considered to be the sign of a healthy historic district.
okay.
So, and especially additions just need to be secondary. Very, 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 very rarely at the front. The vast majority of the time, they're going to be on the sides or the back. And just matters is a compatible design. It doesn't need to be. I mean, at my house, the garage is an addition. With the room above it, that was an addition. I really wish we hadn't approved it that way now before I lived in the house, but I would prefer bigger windows upstairs. But nonetheless, it is what it is.
So my biggest problem has been finding somebody who's available.
Yeah.
Who isn't down to just themselves, like Andy's just himself. It's like. If you know of anybody who's and that's the thing is
and I mean the few people that I know of, it's like they're just saying, no, you can't give my name out, I've got all the work I need, because they enjoy doing the work, not supervising other people doing the work. So and I really respect that. And I totally understand it. So, and Dana, did you have a question?
Are the tax credits available for infill projects?
No.
Okay.
It has to be on the historic property itself. So it would be, and it doesn't include anything that's an addition. So, a new garage, no. Infill, no. Additions need to be approved as part of the project, but you can't use the credit on that part of it. So if you're doing working on your house and you want to put an addition on the rear, but you're also taking the credit for the roof and for the foundation work and the new furnace, you need to have the addition needs to be approved as part of the process, but it's not one of the eligible expenses.
Okay.
I wish that the infill was eligible, but it's definitely not, sadly, because that would be a real asset to get kind of a leverage to get people to do it the right way.
Yeah.
So, anything else? Just so you know, next month we are probably going to have a demolition by neglect and maybe an addition. So far, that's what the agenda is looking like. Maybe more, I don't know. So that's why I really wanted to review these two issues a little bit for you, because they're not. This is going to be important stuff that we're going to be doing. And once the tax credit gets up and running again, we're probably going to get a lot more applications for that. So for different kinds of work that'll be eligible for the credit. We don't make decisions about what's eligible for the credit. But if they need historic district review, it has to be reviewed and approved by the commission before the credit will be applicable. So if they're rebuilding a front porch, we need to review it first and approve it, and then they can go ahead and apply for it as part of their credit app. Dan?
That includes like furnaces and stuff?
Oh, yes.
So we will then be approving people's furnaces for
No,
historic?
we will not. The tax credit people will be reviewing that. We will do our normal review. And if what they're claiming on the credit would normally go through a historic district commission review, our commission trumps their decision,
Gotcha. Okay.
trumps the tax credit. I'm not sure I can use that word as easily as I used to anymore.
Yeah, I don't like hearing that.
Okay, anything else? Now I
No.
wanted to ask Eric, Stuckey and Carla, did I ever send you your orientation packets? Like a complete copy of the standards and guidelines and that kind of stuff. I don't think I
I'm trying
did.
to remember because early on you sent me some hard copy packets for the meetings.
Right. No,
But
this would have been all 60 pages of the standards and guidelines. And
so it's pretty thick.
so yeah, it would have been a pretty thick envelope.
I could check and see. I would know where I would put it if I
Well,
did.
why don't I just send it to both of you again? In fact,
Okay.
if anybody would like the full packet, I can send it to you again. Because it is the standards and guidelines, and it's a PDF that's not that awfully huge, but it's got all the illustrations and stuff. And then there's also some other articles in there about, one is about Robert's Rules of Order. One is about how to have discussion, defensible decisions, that kind of thing.
That's
So
right.
I'll just send it to everybody, and it's it's just bits and bytes, and then you can just leave it on your computer, and when you want to look something up, it'll be right there.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Sharon. Really appreciate you taking the time to give us the training. Super insightful.
Yep.
I
And if
learn
you
a
have
lot
any,
every
if
time.
if a question occurs to you like 2 days from now, when you say, "Hey, wait a minute, what about whatever?"
Yeah.
Just send me an email.
Well, I don't want to take too much of everyone else's time, but I kind of hinted on that with you before. Like, I'm not historic. What would it take for that to happen so I could capitalize on this credit? But also, there's some disadvantages for me
Right.
by doing that as well. Like, how complicated would
really.
that be?
Well, let's not go into that here.
Yeah.
And it's not going to when we're standing in the snow in the cemetery. But but yeah, we can do that sometime and talk about it, because you could be added. You are, to be eligible, you need to be a unique building in your own setting to be a single
And I
resource,
have that.
which you are. And then beyond that, it's just a matter of going through the process.
Yeah, and I have
So-
fantastic integrity. So I
Yep,
mean, I
so-
feel
yep.
like
I can give you a really firm maybe on that, and you'll have to buy me a cup of coffee at Walnut and Park one of these days.
I
and
think
we'll
I can
get
do
over it.
that. I can
Okay.
do that.
Awesome.
Okay. I think we're done
So-
then, eh?
Yeah, we're down to our last motion, which is to adjourn. Is anybody interested in making that motion? Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a second?
I will second the motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Stuckey. I guess all those in favor, aye. Any
Uh,
opposed?
Aye.
Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
See you next month.
thanks, guys.
Good night.
Bye-bye.